What's up, everybody? SEC meetings in Destin continue on. Many coaches sounding off on a potential roster cap. Could this be the end of walk-on college football players? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along on today's show. We're getting you caught up with all the latest of what many of the SEC coaches had to say on Tuesday from Destin and sounding off. Very opinionated, some of these coaches. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, SEC meetings continuing down in Destin. We heard from some of the head football coaches on Tuesday. Here are some highlights of what they had to say. And right underway, Ole Miss head coach Lane Kiffin, kind of interesting. He talked about the SEC football coaches meeting this time around for the first time without Nick Saban. And Lane Kiffin admitting it was very strange not having Coach Saban in the room. And he did admit that Kirby kind of took over and is the lead now. So Kirby Smart, not only the number one ranked college football coach by many in college football now that Saban is gone. Of course, Harbaugh got his championship and jumped to the NFL. It's Dabo up there. Who do you want to rank up there? But obviously Kirby, probably the consensus number one coach in all of college football. And Lane Kiffin saying he's kind of taking over and is the lead now in the SEC as far as, talking about things and getting things done behind the scenes. So the hottest topic among coaches on day one of the annual spring meetings was the possibility of eliminating scholarship limits and replacing them with roster caps. Of course, part of the NCAA settlement, which still needs to be formalized, calls for the end of scholarship limits. Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports reported on this. Currently, football teams get 85 scholarships. Men's basketball gets 13. Women's basketball gets 15. Baseball gets 17 and a half. But for football teams, they can carry as many as 120 players between scholarship athletes and walk-ons. Eliminating scholarships and placing a lower cap on total roster spots would change roster building as we know it. Now, no specific numbers have been officially proposed yet, but if, say, the football roster cap was as low as 85, walk-ons could become a thing of the past. That's still undetermined, but rosters might shrink and the number of walk-ons teams are allowed is going to potentially reduce. So first up, Kirby Smart talked about it. He said, well, look, that's what we're here trying to figure out. I do feel strongly that roster spots are important. Walk-ons are important. Where that falls, that's what we're here to decide. Kirby was asked about, the number of 85, limiting the roster limit. And he said, look, I don't know anybody that wouldn't defend walk-ons. We're talking about something that just makes sense. When you implement that known fact into some form of settlement that I don't completely understand, I don't know what factors in there. But he did mention Will Muschamp, Dabo Swinney, of course, Ladd McConkey. He said all guys that have come to schools as walk-ons and then gone on to be successful football players, some successful coaches. Ladd McConkey, of course, signed with Georgia, but received mostly smaller school offers, and look what he turned into. Meanwhile, at Alabama, Kalen DeBoer, he came off pretty nonchalant about the changes. He said, quote, I've always been one to adjust to the times. Kind of interesting, a little bit different. Kalen DeBoer saying, I'm going to roll with the punches. I did go on to say there's a health and a safety piece for sure that comes into play when it comes to roster size. He said, I think it was smaller college levels. He said, I've been as low as 100 and then as high as 135. I think that somewhere in between that is a good number to have as far as executing throughout the course of a season and having some depth. He said, I have operated with, I was at 110 about 4 years ago, 120 last year at Washington, and we'll have a few more than that with the way in the direction that we're at Alabama this fall. But he was asked, can teams operate safely with a roster cap of 85? He said, obviously, there's always a way. You can ask me any question. I'm going to say there's always a way to get it done. Now, some interesting quotes there from Kalen DeBoer. Blake Topmeyer wrote, he said, Kalen DeBoer had every opportunity to go into Nick Saban mode and give us a lecture on Tuesday, but he didn't. He showed he's, a coach who can adapt and change. And that, of course, is what Nick Saban did later in his career, where he said, you're going to go the way of the dinosaurs if you don't adapt. And so kind of interesting, a very optimistic roll with the punches, Kalen DeBoer perspective. Kind of like it. But a few more here. Sam Pittman of Arkansas, Christina Long of Whole Hog Sports caught up with Sam, and Sam Pittman was asked about it. He said, look, I want to be able to keep it collegiate in that we are helping some guys' dreams with the walk-on program. I think we're able to continue to do that. He said he'd like to see at least 100 players allowed on a roster. That would allow 4 players per position. Too many players could come with financial constraints, but too few would create depth issues and would change the way that teams practice. Pittman gave the example of 2 spotting, in which the first and second teams are going 11 on 11 simultaneously on separate fields. He said it allows more players to get reps in a shorter period. He said, if we don't have the numbers, I think players will say, well, heck, I'm not even getting a chance. That's where 2 spotting helps. It helps them grow, but it also helps them keep in their mind that they have value to the team when they're younger. Kalen DeBoer also talked about 2 spotting and how important it is. But one more from Sam Pittman. He said, we had a conversation with the football coaches. It was pretty thoughtful, I thought. So we shall see. Greg Sankey saying my recommendation is they think about the why. Let's think about the why first, and that usually guides us to the what. A few more on this. Shane Beamer at South Carolina. He was asked about it. He said, I'm absolutely against that. Beamer was a walk-on, played for his dad Frank's team at Virginia Tech. He said, I understand the financial aspect of it, but I think that's completely asinine. Without walk-ons, Beamer said he could not run a football team the way he'd want. And you consider even this past season, plenty of walk-ons on the roster, the Gamecocks were still struggling to practice because they had so many injuries to offensive linemen. They didn't have enough bodies to go first and second team offense simultaneously. And now you consider a world where you have possibly 35 fewer players. Beamer said, to say you're only going to have 85 players and you're eliminating every walk-on from the program, I think that's ridiculous. That, to me, is not a good thing for a lot of reasons. For our program, but for their livelihoods, their futures. Just like Kirby Smart brought up the name Dabo Swinney. Shane Beamer said Dabo Swinney was a walk-on. If you eliminate the walk-on, Dabo Swinney probably never plays football at the University of Alabama, and he's probably not the head football coach at Clemson today. There's so many stories like that. Beamer went on to say, to sit there and say you're going to eliminate guys who are literally paying their own way to go to college and play football from a football standpoint. I know I speak for every football coach in our league when I say we are adamantly against that. So Shane Beamer, pretty fiery when it came to voicing his opinion on the potential elimination of walk-ons and this new world where, look, the idea being, okay, you got the scholarships. Could there be a world where you say, all right, well, we're going to keep the 85 scholarships, but, the walk-ons above that, give them some of this money from this pool of the shared revenue, where everybody's getting paid, everybody is taken care of on the team, but at least the walk-ons are getting paid to potentially supplement their, non-scholarship, pay for their tuition. One more, Pete Thamel caught up with Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lee, who Pete Thamel said he succinctly summed up the ambiguity over roster caps. Clark Lee saying, from what I've heard, is that everything I've heard is not to be trusted. To share an opinion now is irresponsible. So Clark Lee going the vague route there, whereas Shane Beamer very not vague, let you know where he stands. And I like Shane Beamer saying, I speak for, what do you say? I know I speak for every football coach in our league when I say we're adamantly against that. Again, different world. I mean, if it becomes this thing where the revenue's got to be spread around and, if you're going to start paying players, yeah, I see where the value is. Let's cap this thing at 85. We can't have more than that. But no, look, I think the discussions will go on. I don't think we're going to see the elimination of walk-ons, but we could certainly see rosters trimmed down. That's where you start seeing some of the coaches like Sam Pittman and others put a number on it, saying, look, we can't go any less than 100. 110 probably a good number. and maybe we don't need 120, 130, but you kind of start to see where some of the coaches say, yeah, it can't go below this, threshold, and that's where the line really needs to be drawn. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Coming up next, some more tidbits from the coaches speaking yesterday. We'll get to Billy Napier talking about the Jaden Rashada lawsuit. That's coming your way here in just a sec. But first, this episode presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And we've been telling you guys it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home that big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Again, week one lines of college football are already up there. And I was just checking those out earlier today and seeing where they are. A little bit of movement here and there, but not a whole lot. Georgia's still sitting at about a 13.5-point favorite against Clemson in their opener. Vandy, a 13.5-point underdog to Virginia Tech. Florida, 3.5-point underdog to Miami. Texas A&M sitting at a 1.5-point favorite against Notre Dame, and LSU, a 6.5-point favorite against USC in Las Vegas. They got all those lines up there. If you feel pretty good about them now, why not go take advantage? Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnCollege. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOnCollege. Go make every bet count, every playoff shot count, and get you that $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It is FanDuel, and they are America's #1 sports book. Go check them out today. Roll along here, Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. And hey, for your second listen, you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 either on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Again, it is Locked On Sports Today. Get all the biggest stories of the sports world from all of our experts on the Locked On Sports Network, covering your team every day. All right, let's dive back into it as we are discussing some of the takeaways from SEC meetings down in Destin. I almost said media days. That's coming soon. But SEC meetings down in Destin. And we heard from Billy Napier, Florida head coach, speaking with reporters Tuesday afternoon. And he was asked for a comment on the lawsuit filed against him by former Florida signee Jaden Rashada. Rashada's lawsuit, which is over promises allegedly made during his recruitment in a multi-million-dollar NIL deal, claims fraud and damages in excess of $10 million. Billy Napier said, quote, "I think it's important for everyone to understand I can't comment due to the litigation, but I do have confidence in our legal team. I am comfortable with my actions, and I'm thankful for the university's support. We're going to keep it at that and kind of let the process take its course." Interesting quote there. I am comfortable with my actions. So basically Billy Napier saying, yeah, there's nothing I regret here. We did everything how we think was the right way, and we don't think, at least him saying, I'm comfortable in my actions, the booster, the assistant coaches, whoever, but Billy Napier saying, he feels like he did everything on the up and up in his realm. So kind of an interesting quote there. Napier was also asked if the lawsuit has halted any of the positive momentum with the program this offseason. Of course, bringing in a nice recruiting class, DJ Lagway, big-time quarterback coming in, other recruits and transfers. Napier said, I spent probably 30 minutes watching our team this morning before coming over here. We officially started our offseason program for the summer this morning. That's what gives me confidence. I think we executed the first half of the offseason the best we've done since we've been here. We certainly have evolved, and we have adapted. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this, Jaden Rashada lawsuit and Billy Napier. And, obviously it's going to take its time through the system, but Rashada is expected to compete for the #2 backup quarterback job in Georgia behind Carson Beck. And according to that report from John Talty, Georgia head coach Kirby Smart gave Rashada his blessing prior to the lawsuit being filed. Kirby Smart was asked about that report yesterday that he gave Rashada his blessing. Kirby said, "Say what you will, but Jaden told me the day before they decided to do the lawsuit. I told him that would be between his family and the attorneys. I'm not involved in it. George is not involved in it anyway, but Jaden's a good football player. We knew Jaden when he was coming out. It's a good body of work. Kirby was pushed on the fact that a 20-year-old quarterback in the SEC is suing a sitting head coach in the same conference. Kirby pointed toward the possibility this is just the sign of the times in collegiate sports, especially with NIL. He said, I don't know if that's accurate. I talk to Billy all the time about stuff like that. I really don't know what's going on. Billy is named in it. Yes, it's a sign of the times, possibly. I work inside my little bubble, and that's outside my bubble. So, again, that one will be very interesting to keep an eye on. But first time we heard Billy Napier speak on it at all. Very interesting. All right, continue on with other takeaways from SEC meetings over in Destin. Steve Sarkisian, Texas head coach, speaking on a couple of topics. And Sark was asked about joining his former Big 12 teammate in Texas A&M, joining them in the SEC. Sark said there was so much talk about realignment. And for us, we gained two rivals back. We get to play Arkansas and Texas A&M again, and we are looking forward to playing A&M. I'm sure they are as well. Sark also talked about how to make sure coaches are truthful if they do go the way of being required to release injury reports. That was one of the things we talked about yesterday on the show, that these injury reports, even though Greg Sankey said we're not calling that, it's player availability reports. Sark was, asked, how do you make sure coaches are truthful with the injury reports they put out? He said, quote, fine us. That's what they do in the NFL. The NFL has this figured out. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you don't report a guy, fine us. We all like the money that we make. So very transparent Steve Sarkisian. If you, for instance, are playing, I don't know, Texas is playing Georgia this week, and Quinn Ewers has been hobbled at practice, but they don't report it. They put out their injury report, and they don't have Quinn Ewers on there. Sark saying, fine us for lying, basically. So kind of an interesting angle there. Meanwhile, Mike Elko, Texas A&M head coach, he was asked about Texas coming and joining them in the SEC. Elko said, look, we should play them. When you have two programs like that in the same state, just 2 hours away, they should play every year, and it should mean a lot. So obviously he's excited about that game coming back. The Aggies will host the Longhorns the end of the season in College Station. Mike Elko also asked about his roster. He said there are a lot of talented players in our locker room, and I think there are a lot of talented players who are not really excited about the way the last 2 years have gone and want to prove that that was not who they are. So very interesting. We did get a picture of, or a picture came out of Steve Sarkisian greeting Mike Elko at spring meetings in Destin, and kind of an interesting tie. Sark was, of course, Bama's OC when Elko was A&M's DC a couple of years back. So they have coached against one another in that realm, but now they will both do it as the head men at their schools. And one more note on this aspect, Jesse Simonton putting out, he said, very clear the SEC coaches are going to fight tooth and nail against any potential hard 85 roster cap, eliminating valuable walk-ons. He said, Kalen, DeBoer, Steve Sarkisian spoke out about the problems with it, while Mike Elko came out and said, I'm strongly against it. So put Elko in the Shane Beamer camp of strongly against it. Meanwhile, Brent Venables, the Oklahoma head coach, he spoke with the media, and George Stoya of Sooner Scoop caught up with him. He tweeted out, Venables spoke for nearly 40 minutes in Destin this morning, and he said some takeaways. Venables loved the addition of TCU transfer D lineman Dominic Williams, especially his size and experience. Raved about the addition of Branson Hickman on the offensive line, said he has tremendous potential. Says he's been watching film of SEC opponents since January. It says it is a very unforgiving league. So kind of interesting, Brent Venables saying, look, I'm getting to know our opponents. I'm watching film of Bama and LSU and all these schools from last year. He did point to two of those big leaders coming back who, if you don't know yet, get to know them, but linebacker Danny Stutzman and safety Billy Bowman, two really good pieces on that defense. And then he did say he's not worried about quarterback Jackson Arnold living up to the high expectations. That's where a lot of people are saying, if Jackson Arnold's a real deal, well, then Oklahoma can go a long way and win a lot of games this year. If not, they're going to struggle and not win a lot of games. So be very interesting to see there. One more here, and this is probably the best quote of the day, coming from Texas A&M Athletic Director Trev Alberts. But Alberts, talking with the media on Tuesday, said, quote, "We've just always had enough increasing revenue to overcome dumb expenses. I've said it 100 times and I'll say it again. We don't have a revenue problem in college athletics. We have an expense problem." So pretty interesting to put it in that perspective as leaders try to figure out the path forward in collegiate sports. Some very tough decisions to make, but I just love that line. We just always had enough increasing revenue to overcome dumb expenses. It's like if your salary suddenly just doubled tomorrow, wouldn't you go start spending on a lot of dumb stuff because you have all that expendable income? Kind of a very interesting way to look at it. And also funny coming from the A&M athletic director. Now, Trev Alberts had nothing to do with the Jimbo Fisher buyout, but obviously he inherits that problem. He's got to figure out how to budget all that stuff the next handful of years as they continue to pay Jimbo to go away. All right, still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Up next, Hugh Freeze gives us an update on Brian Battie, the running back, and a few more other tidbits. More Locked On SEC coming your way in just a sec. All right, roll along here, Locked On SEC. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Again, we're recapping some of the big topics coming out of SEC spring meetings in Destin on Tuesday and some of the takeaways. And now we got to jump to over at Auburn as Hugh Freeze spoke with the media very briefly, but gave an update on the status of running back Brian Battie, during his appearance at the SEC spring meetings. Freeze saying he's getting better. Honor the family. I don't want to go into too many things, but they do appreciate all the prayers for sure. It's been a difficult time for the whole family, but he seems to be getting better each day. Freeze did add that he does remain in the hospital. And of course, his older brother, Tommy, was among the victims who was killed in the shooting. 4 days after the shooting, Sarasota County deputies did arrest Daryl Brookins, a 28-year-old who was the subject of several Crime Stoppers tips. And he has since been charged with murder, attempted murder, and as a felon in possession of a firearm. Just a absolutely tragic story. And of course, we continue to wish the best for Brian Battie down there in the state of Florida. Reportedly, shot in the head, and just absolutely awful news. But again, Hugh Freeze finally speaking with the media and giving an update on him. Meanwhile, Jeff Lebby made a quick appearance on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday with his athletic director, Zach Selman, in tow. And Jeff Lebby talked about his Mississippi State team. He said, "I feel great about where we are at staff as a staffing standpoint." He said, "Taking stuff off my plate now so I can focus on touchdown plays." And Zach Selman added, "I love touchdowns." I continue to say Jeff Lebby and Mississippi State are the wild card this year. I mean, they're like the rich guy at the end of the poker table that's playing with house money. They really got nothing to lose, and nobody is expecting them to win. Everybody's expecting to win, 3-4 games this year and be awful. But they really hit up that transfer portal and brought in some interesting pieces like Blake Shapen, the quarterback from Baylor. I mean, they've got some nice weapons at wide receiver. And now Jeff Lebby saying, now I can focus, take all that coaching stuff off my plate. Now I can just focus on calling touchdown plays. Yeah, Mississippi State, they're going to pull off an upset of somebody this year. It feels that way. I don't know who they're going to beat, but certainly feels like they're going to pull off a stunner somewhere this season. A few other tidbits. The talk of the expanded playoff. Kalen DeBoer was asked about it, and he said, "Look, I don't like to think you have a little wiggle room because you have more teams in the playoff." He said, "I don't want us thinking that way." And it's an interesting quote because a lot of teams are, or fans we've been talking about going, yeah, we don't have to go undefeated anymore. If we go, 10-2, yeah, we may not win the SEC, but we're in the playoff. And Kalen DeBoer's kind of saying, we don't want to think that way. We want to think, let's win every game. Let's try to go undefeated. And whatever happens, happens. But, interesting to hear a head coach say that. Meanwhile, Kalen DeBoer saying that the longer season is ahead, or the longer season ahead for many teams with the expanded playoff. How is his team adjusting? He said, we're moving to being a morning practice team. He said, over the course of months, you're conscious of the amount of sleep guys are getting. And, rest your body, get ready, and you're going to have some long days going to class and all this. And then, longer season, longer weeks of playing football, more games. So interesting there. One more tidbit. Kirby Smart asked about, the potential future of a 9-game schedule in the SEC. Of course, it's not going to happen in 2024. It's not going to happen in 2025, but 2026 still on the table. Kirby saying yesterday, it's a hot button topic. It's on all y'all's little memo. It says, ask the question about 8 or 9 games. I'm completely cool with that question. I don't care about 8 or 9. I don't care one bit. If you tell me we're going to get more teams in by playing 9, I vote for that. If we're going to have a strength of schedule factor, it says these teams that play really hard teams, they should be allowed to have 2 or 3 losses and get in, then I'm for that. It doesn't help us, then you could say, why do it? The fan, the guy that pays the ticket prices, they want those games. They want more SEC games. So be interesting to watch that. Tomorrow, perhaps we'll hear from guys like Brian Kelly, Eli Drinkwitz, Mark Stoops. Didn't see anything from those guys today out there at SEC meetings. I do want to give a shout out or a quick condolence out to Josh Heupel. Reports are his mother passed away just recently. So we'll see what Coach Heupel's availability will be this week in Destin. One roster note here for LSU before we get out of here. Brian Kelly and his staff landing another player in the transfer portal. Former Louisiana Tech punter Blake Oschendorf, one of the top transfer punters in the nation, announced his decision to transfer to LSU. He was Conference USA's top punter from last season. And Brian Kelly was displeased with the performance of his current punter, Peyton Todd, during the spring. Of course, they're trying to replace his former LSU punter, Jaden Bramblett, who followed him down to Baton Rouge from Notre Dame. So he led Conference USA in punting average and ranked in the top 20 in the nation last year. So LSU didn't bring in a ton through the portal, but pieces like defensive lineman Gio Paez, JVR Suggs, and now bringing in another punter. One note, I did see Matt Hayes wrote a piece at Saturday Down South yesterday about the LSU versus USC game in week 1. Said it's a blockbuster with playoff implications, a blockbuster that USC spent nearly 2 years trying to get out of. But he said a source told Saturday Down South they were not getting out of the game. Kind of interesting that LSU didn't maybe consider getting out of the game in this realm of, I keep bringing this up. Look at Michigan's schedule last year in their non-conference. They played nobody. They played Bowling Green and ECU, and none of that mattered. Come playoff, selection committee, when it was their time to go to the room to decide, they're like, Michigan, they're in. And it was like nobody asked who they play non-conference. Nobody asked, yeah, but, did they lose a really tough non-conference game? No. At the end of the day, the college football playoff committee is saying, did you go undefeated? Are you sitting there, with no losses in a good conference? Now, Florida State's a whole nother discussion. They went undefeated, but they didn't get the respect in the ACC. But just interesting at LSU, like you're going to play USC on a neutral field and play UCLA. Just seems like why play both of them in the same? I mean, any other year, UCLA would be your tough one non-conference game. Then go play a bunch of, scrappies, play Southeastern, play Southern, play UL Monroe. Instead, they're going to play USC as well. Just seems like an unnecessary potential pitfall for Brian Kelly in year 3 at LSU. Now, maybe if LSU is able to beat both USC and UCLA in the non-conference, maybe that buys them 2 SEC losses. Maybe you can lose to Bama and lose to Ole Miss, and yet the committee will still say, look, you beat those 2 really good former Pac-12 now Big Ten teams in the non-con, you get a bump. We're going to bump you ahead of a Liberty or whoever the best at-large team is. We'll see how all that plays out. But anyway, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to Everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show. We'll be talking more about the SEC meetings in Destin and more of the takeaways. Hey, for your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today here for you 24/7, covering all the biggest stories in the sports world. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.